that's a good example of what the administration is trying to do.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Simon has been waiting here patiently
Yes.
since prior to 10 o'clock this morning.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We welcome you here, Dr. Tyson, and I just want to say you and the President and whoever was involved in putting together what happened last year in reconciliation made a huge contribution to our economy, and you can be very proud of that. I have read your written testimony and seen the blast at the balanced budget amendment in here, and I do have a comment or two about it. First, a very basic question. Have you had the chance to read our proposal for a balanced budget amendment?
I believe we discussed it
We
a
have
few months
discussed
ago,
it, but
and then we went through the language at that time. I have not read, if there have been revisions since then, I have not.
Okay. Meaning no disrespect to your testimony, I think it reflects the fact that someone in your staff has not read the proposal. Let me just take point by point what you say in your testimony. By itself, an amendment to the Constitution would not reduce the federal deficit by a single penny. No question about that. But what we do is we force ourselves to make the tough choices. It is rare that we've made tough choices in the federal government. There's an old saw about there were so many heroes at the Alamo because there was no back door. And what we have to do is create a situation where there is no back door. Second, you say, on the economic front, a balanced budget amendment would put the fiscal policy of the federal government in a straitjacket that might imperil macroeconomic stability. First, we permit, with a 60% vote, a deficit. And you will find, for example, when the House voted on the California earthquake, it got, 85% vote. Second, as you undoubtedly are aware, a great many economists believe we are in a straitjacket because we have created such a huge deficit, and we can't respond. That was when the president asked for a job stimulus. There was reluctance to respond. There are also those, and I happen to agree with this, there ought to be some small pool that is available to the president where the president can respond when unemployment in a state or an area goes above X%, the president can respond very quickly. Balanced budget amendment doesn't prevent doing that. Then you say it is possible that a balanced budget amendment could push economic policy decisions to the courts, hardly the appropriate place for making macroeconomic policy. I could not agree more on the courts not being the proper place, but part of the constitutional amendment says the Congress shall enforce and implement this article by appropriate legislation. We have the ability to say who has standing in the courts, and the courts have always recognized that. So that really is not a problem. Then you say the economic effects of a balanced budget amendment could be sobering. I would use the word exhilarating rather than sobering, but because the econometric forecasts are that interest rates will drop if we adopt it. And then you say, in crude terms, this would require reducing the annual deficit by about $200 billion in 1999. We are going to be changing the effective year to 2001, but no one suggests.
Oh, excuse me. Did you say you're going to change the effect of the balanced budget amendment out of 2001?
2001, from 1999. This is the year that the Concord Coalition and some others have recommended that we get on a glide path. And no one suggests we do it in 1 year, that we move on a glide path. And if I had the Domenici chart in front of me, it would show that what would be required is less of a drop for these next years than we have had for the last two. It is not any great problem. Then you call it budget gimmickry. The best answer to that was from Representative Olympia Snow of Maine, who said if it was a budget gimmick, Congress would have passed it a long time ago. I would add that if it were simply budget gimmickry, I don't think my friend Senator Robert Byrd would be out there working quite as hard against it as he is right now. The reality is that it has teeth. And I would add further on budget gimmickry. Right now, we do off budget, on budget. We have all kinds of budget gimmicks. This does not permit that. We can go ahead on budget and off budget, but the totals have to be there. And we have one other little thing that prevents budget gimmickry. We say to increase the federal debt, it requires a 3/5 vote. Believe me, that puts teeth in this. This is no budget gimmick. You say, finally, we must avoid taking a detour off the road of fiscal responsibility by enacting the balanced budget amendment. The big argument that is made here and was made in 1986, the last time we voted on this, when the balanced budget amendment lost by 1 vote. The argument was made, we can balance the budget without a constitutional amendment. In 1986, when it lost by 1 vote, the federal debt was $2 trillion. Now it is $4.4 trillion. And if we defeat it this time, the next time it'll come up, our debt will be $9 trillion or whatever the heck it is. Finally, I would refer to your own documents, analytical perspectives. And on page 25, they say that without, and this is largely because of the debt situation, that before we enacted reconciliation last year, future generations would be paying 93% of their net lifetime income in taxes. But with the reconciliation and health care reform, it will be somewhere between 66 and 75% of lifetime income in taxes. Now,
Who said that?
that just isn't going to happen. And what is the history of nations, and you take a look at those GAO charts of debt versus GDP, when a nation gets anywhere close to this, you start monetizing the debt. And one of the ironies is some of the seniors organizations are opposed to the balanced budget amendment. It doesn't do any good to get $1,000 in Social Security if a quart of milk costs $100. If you just start printing money, the reality is we have to get a hold of this thing. And I don't think anything is going to force us to get a hold of it unless we have a balanced budget. Somebody says we have the Domenici chart in back of me now. Here. All right. This isn't copyrighted, is it? No.
Sir, it's not mine. I borrowed it from the president.
Okay. Here is where we are. That's what's happened. You can see this appreciable downgrade. And here's 2001. And what we are suggesting is a level of gradual decline appreciably less than has happened the last 2 years. We're not asking for anything that is that dramatic, except what we are asking for is that we do something for the future of our kids. Every generation of Americans has taken care of themselves and invested in the future. We're the first generation of Americans to partially take care of ourselves and borrow from the future. We have to face up to this. And I know it is tough for an administration because you'd sooner have those figures where you can have a little more leeway, but I think we have to face up to this. Warren Buffett, who is listened to a great deal in the economic field, Warren Buffett says we're either going to have a constitutional amendment or we're going to end up monetizing the debt. I think that is the reality. And let me just ask you one question. Do you know of any country that has gone close to 75% of lifetime income on taxation that hasn't ended up monetizing the debt?
I think, I really don't, it would be inappropriate for me to answer that question because I have no idea what the comparable numbers are for other countries at this point in time. I really don't think, I don't even think that's the issue here. The issue here, it seems to me, is a balanced budget amendment good for the economy? And I think the answer is no. And I think the answer is no because I'm not comforted by the fact that 60% majority could, if they so decided, and there weren't the sort of pressures of short-term political advantage to get the economy out of some difficulty. But I don't want the economy to be hamstrung by having to depend upon a 60% majority in a complicated set of political circumstances to make what is the correct judgment for the macroeconomy. There is widespread agreement among macroeconomists of different persuasions, running really the ideological gamut across the economics profession. There's widespread agreement that a balanced budget amendment is not a good idea because it takes away one of the strengths of a modern market economy, which is the ability of fiscal policy to automatically stabilize the cyclicality of the economy. Even if we are, for the next 5 years or so, in a period of sustained expansion, even if our best projections turn out to be true, I agree with Senator Domenici. Modern market economies have inherent cyclicality. And one of the things that we came out of World War II with, not just here, but throughout the advanced industrial world, was a realization that fiscal policy, by being countercyclical, could moderate the ups and downs of the cyclicality. What we're doing here is we're saying we're going to tie one hand behind our back. Maybe we can do it if we get the 60% vote, but if we can't, the recessions will be deeper, more people will be unemployed. You take what is a natural cyclical downturn and you aggravate it. So I think it's bad for the economy for that reason. I also think it's bad for the economy in the short to medium run. I mean, we can talk about the 2001, how far out it goes, but I mean, the point is that it is, according to the simulations we have done and others are doing, there are other forecasting agencies doing simulations, it is extremely likely that that a balanced budget amendment enforced sometime in this decade, that is bringing the structural budget balance to zero sometime by the end of this decade, will have a serious contractionary effect on the economy. Why take the economy at a moment in time when its fundamentals look good, when the debt is coming down relative to the GDP and the deficit is coming down relative to GDP and inflation is low and we've begun to make the hard and right choices? Why take that moment in history, which doesn't come too often, and subject the economy to a additional contractionary impulse, which is a substantial contractionary impulse? Remember, what our numbers are saying is we might have to have interest rates fall by 2 percentage points, 200 basis points. That is a lot. Do we want to depend upon that? Do we want to say to the economy, we will take this much out in fiscal stimulus, and we hope that the financial markets give us 200 basis points? These would be unprecedented in terms of low interest rates. So I think it's bad for the economy, both in terms of its contractionary impulse and the limit on countercyclical fiscal policy. Finally, the point on budget gimmickry is frankly that there are since the hard choices, you admit, the hard choices are not made by signing on to the constitutional amendment. The hard choices are, do you want to increase revenues? Do you want to cut Social Security? Do you want to cut health care spending? Those are the hard choices. The interest payments on the debt we're not going to cut. They move with the interest rate and the debt. So we got 3 hard choices here. Or defense. I'll put a defense on. We have 4 hard choices. That's where all the money is. That's where the big money is. So you're going to have to take on one of those things. Now, I think people are signing this or saying they're going to sign it, and there's big disagreement among the people about, well, some people will say I'll cut defense, others will say I'll cut health, others will say I'll increase taxes. I'm not at all convinced that at the end of the day there would be an agreement on how to balance the budget. And so what would be the consequence of that? Budget gimmickry. I mean, you have the balanced budget, it's in effect, the balanced budget amendment is in effect, no one can agree on what to cut or what taxes to increase, it's all too difficult. So in order to get around it, you go to gimmickry. That's really a serious concern. Yeah. And then finally, one other point. As the CBO pointed out, and we have pointed out, there are really only 2 issues. There are 2 things that are driving those deficit numbers up after the year 2000. They're health care spending and interest payments on the debt. Interest payments on the debt is basically we can work on getting the economy in order so that interest rates stay down, and that helps. Then the only way to get a handle on debt accumulation is to get a handle on health care. So why not then have a full-fledged discussion of health care reform? Why discuss the balanced budget? Why not discuss health care reform and how to get those health care spending numbers under control?
Let me, if I may just,
Well, now, Senator Simon, you made a long talk, and I don't mind, but Senator Gordon's been waiting here, too.
he has been very, if I can have one more minute.
I'm going to give him that because he's talking about the same subject I am, so.
Yeah. On health care, I'm a co-sponsor of the President's program. I'm for it. But to suggest that that is going to solve our deficit problems is living in a dream world. It is just not going to happen. It's going to help, I think, but it is not going to solve the problem. In terms of economists, the majority of economists are on the other side, though that number is shrinking. I'm pleased to say there are more and more who are coming around. I got a note from a distinguished economist the other day who is widely recognized, who said, I've opposed it in the past. He said, I think it's a bad idea whose time has come. He said, I think it's essential now for the nation to do it. One of those four big items that you mentioned is interest, of course. And if we can get that down, then that's going to help the future immensely. Finally, I have the choice of agreeing with Dr. Tyson or Thomas Jefferson, who was not in the United States when the Constitution was written. When he returned in 1787, he was over in Paris negotiating for us. When he returned, he said, if I could add one amendment to the Constitution, it would be to prohibit the federal government from borrowing money. One generation should not be able to obligate the next generation. He wanted an absolute prohibition. We provide greater flexibility. But faced with a choice of agreeing with Dr. Tyson or Thomas Jefferson, you'll forgive me for agreeing with Thomas Jefferson.
I would. I just wish I'd had the opportunity to try to convince Mr. Jefferson.
Thank you, Dr. Tyson. Senator Domenici.
Thank you.
Would my colleague yield to me for 30 seconds? I would just point out that CBO says that over a 4-year period through reconciliation last year, you reduced the deficit $433 billion, and that has been a boon to the economy, as you have testified. CBO also says to get a balanced budget, we would have to, over a period of years, reduce the deficit another $600 billion. That, you say, is, instead of being a boon to the economy, that's going to be a terrible thing for the economy. I can't quite see why one is a great boon to the economy and the other thing is a great terrible thing for the economy. I think there's
It's basically
a
because
slight
of
inconsistency.
it's basically because of where we're starting out. We started out with much higher interest rates, so there was much more room for a substantial reduction in interest rates. We are now at a situation where interest rates are quite low historically, and the question is, can we anticipate a long-term interest rate of 3 percentage points? Not.
It's stolen from your
historically, it's risky. It's very risky. It's very risky. I want to say it subjects the economy to a substantial amount of contractionary risk, which we do not believe is necessary. We believe that instead you should handle the issue of out-year deficits through health care reform.
Historically, the interest rates have times been much lower. When one of my predecessors, Paul Douglas, an economist, made a speech warning about the deficit, that year, 1950, the average prime rate in this nation was 2.0%.
Interestingly enough, in 1950, GDP, the ratio of debt to GDP was 82.4%. I think today it's, what, 52%, Dr.
And going
Tyson?
down, and reversing, going down relative to GDP.
Senator Domenici.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Tyson, let me